All right, welcome everyone. It's Martin Perhiniak, and I would like to introduce our webinar that we will be doing today. BenQ asked me to go through a workflow that I was presenting this year at Adobe MAX and explain the things that I'm using in Adobe Illustrator to illustrate funny characters, in this case monsters, one of my favorite topics. So these are the techniques that I showed at Adobe MAX as well, and this is pretty much my core workflow that I would do for character art. So you can see already on my screen a couple of examples of monsters, but the main one that we will be going through today is this guy here, the Dracula caricature. So this is a drawing that I will be tracing over in Illustrator. So that's going to be the main part of the webinar. So you will see me starting off with this illustration and then do vector artwork over it. And also I am going to show you a couple of additional techniques. And there will be actually a part where I will ask you to decide what you want to see. So I prepared a couple of different examples and you will be able to choose which one would you like to see. So my aim is really to cover as much as possible. And besides the technical aspect of drawing, I would like to also talk a little bit about the theory and how to create engaging characters, which is always the difficult thing. But before I get into any of these, I wanted to also mention that within the questions area, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just write it there. I won't be able to respond to it until the very end. So we will have a questions and answers when I will see all the questions that you had, and then I will respond to hopefully everything that you asked. But yeah, so don't worry if you ask your questions, only I can see them, and then I will be able to reply to it at the end. So I hope you will enjoy this webinar, and let's get started. So first of all, I wanted to mention that you can see the process here, that what I start off is always a rough sketch, which doesn't take normally more than 5 to 10 minutes. And that's what you can see on the left side. This is normally something in the past, I used to do this on paper, but recently I do everything on the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil, especially the new one that just came out recently, is a brilliant tool that I can take easily with me anywhere, and I can just do my sketches. I wouldn't normally do a fully finished, like refined artwork on the iPad. This is just to capture my ideas and then take them into Illustrator to refine them further. So that's what you see on the right side, like a final illustration would look something like that, which is on the right side. And because it was around Halloween time, I just themed it around that as well. But let's just go to the next page. I just wanted to also show you, it's a funny example of when I was 12 years old, how I used to draw my characters, and then a bit of like a progression of how it changed. And the reason why someone can be good at drawing is simply just the sheer amount of drawings you do. So the more you draw, the better you get. And depending on what type of things you draw, you probably will get good at that. So since I was really young, I think, like probably started drawing 4 or 5 years old, I was always fascinated by imaginary creatures and monsters in particular. So obviously I got good at drawing them. And it's never ending. So obviously I'm still practicing, still trying to get better. But it's just a thing that if you're not good at drawing, it's never too late. It's just literally sit down, draw a bit every day, and you will get better eventually. The type of work that I do professionally is graphic design and illustration. I would say usually a mixture between the two. So you can see a couple of examples here. I worked for Disney as well, doing brand guide or style guides for their franchise, like Cars and Toy Story. I worked for clients like Hot Wheels or Mattel, doing their annual calendars. and various different projects. But I would say most of the time that these days I'm focusing on creating online educational materials. So it's either online design courses that you can see. I'm quite proud to say that it's Illustrator Masterclass is the best-selling Illustrator course on Udemy that I've created last year. I think it was recorded, but I keep updating it frequently. And the 365 Days of Creativity was a huge project that was running this year and is still running. It's going to finish in a couple of weeks. It was basically a creative project every day shown on our YouTube channel. So if you're not following us on YouTube, yes, I'm a designer, make sure to check it out because we have lots of interesting content there. All right, and having said that, let's just jump straight into Illustrator and let's get this thing going. So the first thing that I would normally do is to bring in the illustration to my artboard, as you can see it here. So this is what I created in Procreate, and it looks really refined in this case. Sometimes it is just that simple sketch, the rough sketch. Sometimes it's more like a color version like this one, even with shading on it. So this is obviously much easier to work on, but it could be time consuming to get to this point. And to be honest, most of the times I wouldn't do it as refined as this. I would do more the details here within Illustrator. But once I place my artwork, and this is simply just placing it in through the file menu, once I place the artwork here, I can use the layers to set the image up as a tracing layer. So tracing layer means that you can work over it and also dim the image a bit. So what I would normally do is double click on the layer. So I'm just showing it to you here. So the reference layer is going to become my tracing layer. And it's actually called template. That's the feature. Once you turn that on, you can decide how much visibility you want. I normally set this to 30%. And then once I click OK, you can see it starts blending in the background. But what's more important is that I won't be able to accidentally move it around or make any selections over it. So that's much easier to work on. And I would create a separate layer on top of that where I can start doing my drawing. Now, one of the tools that I wanted to mention, and obviously CC 2019 is an amazing update to Illustrator. So I'm going to show you a couple of new features as well. And there's one thing that I actually discovered very recently, which I haven't even shown to anyone yet. So you guys will be the first one to see this technique. It's a huge time saver working in symmetry in Illustrator. It's always a pain to set that up, but I just came up with this technique a couple of days ago using one of the latest features in CC 2019. So one of the tools that I wanted to highlight is the curvature tool. And this is a tool that was introduced not in the latest version, slightly, I think 2018 maybe, but this is one of the tools that looks very similar and works very similarly to the pen tool, but still it's an amazing tool and really useful to work with. So you can see if I have the pen tool selected, first I will show you how I work with the pen tool, and then you will see the curvature tool as well. So with the pen tool, what I would normally do is to place my anchor points on turning points or like corner points. Like here, if I'm working on the cape in this case, I would start on one of the corner points, then I would place another point down there, another point here, another point there. And notice that while I'm drawing, it automatically adds a fill color that you can very quickly remove by making sure that the fill color is highlighted. Notice here in the toolbar on the left, when I'm pressing X on the keyboard, I can switch between the fill and the stroke. Make sure the fill color is on top, and then press question mark on the keyboard or /, and that will remove the color. And immediately we can see what we are doing. So we don't actually need the fill color in this case. So most of the time when I'm doing tracing, I draw without the fill color, and then I add that later. So I have these points in place, as you can see. And then what we need to do is to go up all the way, probably somewhere around here. Let me just think. Yeah, that's probably it. then all the way on the other side, and then come down here. Okay, now this might be a little bit too less anchor points to define the cape. Sometimes I would add maybe another anchor point here, but let's just see if we can do it with this much. Now, the shortcut that I'm going to show you with the pen tool is actually a feature called Reshape, and this was introduced in CC 2017 maybe, or 18. Again, I can't remember exactly which version, but yes, as long as you have the latest version, you will be able to use this for sure. All you have to do is to keep the pen tool selected, but hold down the Option or Alt key, depending on whether you are using Mac or PC. And while holding this key down, the modifier key, if you hover over any of the lines, you will get this icon that you see at the moment. So the cursor changes from the pen to this special arrow. And when you use this, you basically turn any straight lines into curves. So you can modify the line, and you can see how nicely I can drag it down. I can also drag this curve here. I can drag that other side, and then I can drag this one here as well to fit to the cape. So starting with straight lines, and then later shaping your structure, or the you can even call this, I sometimes would call it like the skeleton of the shape, into the actual shape that you need by just using the Alt or Option key with the pen tool. So this is a huge time saver, and I use this all the time. And then, of course, taking this further, we could add the color and we could refine it. I don't want to go into details. I rather concentrate on the core features that I use all the time. So just to show again the same technique on the coat, for example, what I would do there is that you, again, just place down anchor points on the turning points or corner points. Like, let's say if I'm drawing here the cape, I would come down, sorry, not the cape in this case, it's the coat. I'm not bothered about drawing any curves. I'm just going to draw these points, and then maybe here I can put down a point. To be honest, I can close it up like that as well. And if I hold down the Alt key, I can come down. And here's another shortcut. This is even cooler than just simply holding down the Alt key. So you notice that if I wanted to follow that line there, and actually, let me just zoom a little bit closer. It might be easier to see what's going on here. So if I hold down the Alt key and start dragging this line down, notice how it doesn't really follow the lines that we need. So on the left side, it should look like that. On the right side, it should look like that. But at the moment, when I'm dragging it down, it's not going to work. But if you hold down the Shift key as well, so Alt Shift or Option Shift, that creates a different curve or different handle points, which are symmetrical. So notice how those handles are coming towards the center by default when I'm just holding down the Alt or Option key. But then when I hold down the Shift key as well, they become parallel to each other, and that helps to create a completely different type of curve, which fits much better to what we need. But of course, once you have a curve, you can also work with the handle. So you can hold down the Alt key and further amend the handles independently of each other. So I can use the one on the right side to set it up the way I want it, and I can use the one on the left side as well. Now, this is what I mentioned, that sometimes if you want to do a more complex shape and you just have one long straight line, even these techniques might not be enough. So as you can see, I am a little bit struggling to align it there. So what I can do in these cases is to place an additional anchor point on the curve. So even if you already turned your straight line into a curve, you can still add anchor points. And then another shortcut, which I use all the time, is the Command or Control key. So now it's all three modifiers we tried out. So Command or Control key helps you to move anchor points around, or also handle points, by the way. So any existing anchor points can be moved around and shifted. And in this case, look at what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag these handles out. So that keeps the center part of the curve straight, and then only here at the end, I'm going to use these steep handles to define that shape that we need for those very sharp angles. So you can see immediately how much better it looks. And of course, we could go further and then again, holding down the Alt or Option key, drag this line out, and then hold down Control or Command key and drag that handle back, this one down a bit, and immediately we have a nice curve there. So see how I'm combining the shortcuts that I mentioned already. So again, I'm using the Alt or Option key, drag this in a bit, and then Control or Command key to drag that handle out. So once again, we have a very nice curve on the right side. And believe me, working with the pen tool is one of the most important techniques and methods that you need to really master in Illustrator. If you want to be good, and especially if you want to be fast and efficient in creating vector artwork, this is the tool that you need to learn, most important one. There's no question about that. Obviously, Illustrator offers so many different tools, but this is one of the first ones that you really need to master and learn. And it's useful not only in Illustrator, but also in Photoshop, because you can do amazing selections with it. You can create vector masks with it, and you can also stroke paths, which can be very useful, like run a brush along a path, and so on and so forth. So Photoshop also has the same shortcuts for the pen tool. And then there is InDesign as well, where you can create custom frames and all kinds of things. So it's and clipping masks or clipping paths. So these are all like working the same way, but I would say it's best to learn it in Illustrator because that's where it's the most crucial tool. Now, let me show you one more thing about the pen tool, and this is another huge time saver. So let's just say I am drawing something like the wings for the bat. Okay, so if I use the pen tool and I start drawing these points here, okay, I can place a point, but if I feel like it's not in the right place, I can hold down the space bar and move that anchor point around while I'm still drawing with the pen tool. So let me just zoom a little bit closer again. So if I go to the next point here, click and drag in this case, so I'm not relying on the reshape tool now, I'm just click and dragging to create a curve instead of a straight line. But notice that if I feel like it's not in the right place, I can still move it around. And when I let the space bar go, that's when I can continue amending the handles. When I hold down the space bar, I am moving the anchor around, and then again let go, and then further amend the handles. So this is again very useful technique. So space bar, Command or Control, or Alt or Option, and the Shift key all has their uses. Shift key also does another thing. So when you're drawing straight lines, it makes sure that it is going to be completely vertical or horizontal. So I can holding down the Shift key, I can do these lines and also 45-degree angles. So these directions as well with the Shift key you can do. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the pen tool. But now let's look at another tool which works very similarly to the pen tool, and that is the curvature tool, which I mentioned briefly. So it looks very similarly to the pen tool. And by the way, this is also something that I get questions about, that in the latest version of Illustrator, there's a couple of tools missing when you first start the application. And that's because they introduced the option to customize your toolbar. So this is also available in Photoshop, not yet available in InDesign, but I'm sure they will have it there as well soon. You can find these three little dots at the bottom. If you click on that, that's where you will find all the tools that are currently hidden. Now, I have actually all my tools within the toolbar, but what you can do is to go to this little drop down here, and if you choose Advanced, you can set it back to the default setting where you see all the tools. But if you are in basic mode, that will look like this. Now, this is the new simplified toolbar that they introduced in CC 2019. This is great for newer users, but the cool thing is that you can obviously customize this as well, but you can even create your own toolbars. So you can even set up a toolbar for tracing, another one for coloring, and so on and so forth. I'm going to switch back to advanced. I like to see all the tools most of the time, and to be honest, I use the shortcuts for almost all the tools, so I don't even rely on the toolbar anyway. But yeah, let's have the curvature tool selected. So what's the difference between the pen tool and the curvature tool? I would say it's an inverted pen tool. So that's the easiest way to think about it. While a pen tool is drawing straight lines by default and curves by click and dragging, the curvature tool is the opposite. So it draws curves by default and can be forced to draw straight lines. So let's see how this works. If I draw here the bat wing again, I just place down my first point, anchor point, and then I click again. And notice what happens here. When I'm moving further, it automatically wants to create a curve. And maybe I'll show this on the cape because that's a little bit easier example. I'm just going to delete this here. Let's just zoom a little bit closer. So it's a bigger shape. We can see better how it works. So curvature tool. By the way, I'm going to change the color of my stroke to maybe this, let's just make it white or red. And I increase the stroke size as well, just to make sure you can see it better what I'm drawing. All right, so that looks all right. So if I start drawing here and I click somewhere on the top, okay, then if I click on this point here and then I move further, see how it automatically creates that curve between the 2 points. So I can click maybe on the top there and another point here, and you see how it's again curving it the other way. Now, it might feel a bit difficult to work with in the beginning, and you would be tempted to add a lot of anchor points while you're drawing to make sure it is drawing in the right direction. But there's a very important shortcut or technique that you need to learn with this tool, and that is double click. If you double click on any point, that is going to create a corner point. So by default, it always wants to create a continuous flow between your anchor points. And you can only restrict it by double clicking on your anchor point, which immediately turns that point into a sharp corner, as you can see it here as well. Or if I do it here, again, it should change into a sharp corner. So you can always go back, not just your last point, but any of the points within a curvature path. You can do this. But now if I come down here and I click again, see again, it created that nice line. But I can also always come back and make amends to these points. So I can click and drag to add an additional point there. So instead of holding the Alt or Option key here, you are just click and dragging to mold the shape that you created with the curvature tool. So again, if I want to make a sharp corner here, I just double click, come in, and then again, I can go down by double clicking. And if I want to have a subtle curve, I can click maybe here, then click again there. And if I feel like this comes out too much, I can bend it back, and so on and so forth. So it is very similar to the pen tool. I mean, working with the curvature tool, but I would say it's a little bit even more intuitive. So it just really takes some time to get used to. The only downside of working with the curvature tool, I find, is if you are really good at working with the pen tool, you will probably use less anchor points there than here. And I wouldn't even call these anchor points in the curvature tool. They even look different. You can see that they are circles instead of squares. So we can probably call them curvature points or curve points or something like that. I'm not sure what the actual technical term for it. Yeah, it's curvature point. There you go. By right-clicking on it, I can see it. So they work in a different way, and that's why you actually need more of them. So that can be a little bit of a problem, because later on you might want to move things around, and the more points you have, usually the more complicated it is to make changes. Give it a try. It's really something that you have to start using, otherwise you won't be able to tell which one you prefer. In my opinion, I think they are just as good, and normally what I find myself doing is that if I have a very complex shape which has a lot of curves on it, so more like an organic shape, then I would use the curvature tool. If I have a shape that has a variety of straight lines and curves, so more geometric, I would say, then I would use the pen tool. So it depends what you are drawing. So they both have their advantages. And if I could just come back to the wing here again, because it has a couple of curves on it. Now, if I were to draw this with the pen tool, you remember how I was drawing it with the reshape technique. I would do exactly the same thing here. So if I just draw this shape, okay, and then hold down the Alt key, this is how I would work with the pen tool. And holding down Alt or Command, you can change the lines easily, the direction lines as well. And Alt click and drag, Alt click and drag. Remember Shift key as well. I would try which one fits better. Like here, I think the Shift key will work better. No, actually, that's better. And I'm just going to adjust these slightly, drag it down, and there you go. So you can see that was the pen tool. Now with the curvature tool, so if I just delete that whole thing, if I work with the curvature tool, I'm just going to change the color so you can see that it's a different tool. With this one, if I just keep going like this, you might feel like that this is completely off, and like if I just do the same anchor points, it's not going to work. And here there's no reshape. I could just add that additional points in, but it would never be as good. But if I now double click on these points, okay, let's see what happens. I double click on these points, and that as well there, and that as well, that as well, then I can drag them into place. As I said, this might be more time consuming, but again, depends on the shape that you are drawing. Both techniques can work. And I find it sometimes that it's easier to amend the curve like this with these points than the handles. So notice that there's no handles here. And that's one of the interesting aspects of working with the curvature tool. So instead of a handle, you have a curvature point, which you can move around, and see how it works differently, like it behaves differently than working with two handles. It's more like almost like a sculpture that you can mold. That's the best way I can explain how I feel like working with this tool. So you are molding parts instead of constructing them. Okay, so I hope this makes sense, because this is really the key between the two tools, and there's no real better tool than the other one. They are doing the same thing slightly differently, and as I said, it's something that you have to give it a try. And if you haven't started using the curvature tool, make sure you do, and don't just try it for like drawing one thing and then I don't like it, give it up. Anything new in Illustrator, I always scrutinize, really like force myself to come up with a way of using it. A good example is the puppet work, which a lot of people are still saying is completely useless for Photoshop. When it was released, I think the demo that they showed with it was just to, I think it was an elephant trunk, and then they were moving the trunk separately and like transforming it, making it look like it was moved in a different direction. And everyone remember that example, but it is actually something that I use all the time, and you can do amazing things with, as long as you start experimenting and learning and coming up with your own workflows and techniques around these new tools. So curvature tool, highly recommend to give it a try if you haven't already started using it. But before I go any further, and I have a couple of amazing other tools to show you and explain how I use them, before we go any further, I would like to just spend a little bit of time on the like the extra content for this webinar. So I prepared 3 examples, and let me just show this quickly on my screen. So I have the 3 examples you will see on my screen now. So we have the fox, the wolf, and the mountains. Each of these are roughly around like 5 minutes. I can spend on these to explain how I created them, and each has a unique technique that I wanted to show. The fox is about working with shapes, specifically ellipses and the shape builder tool, and how to draw something like that just purely using circles. The wolf head is about how to set up symmetry with the new feature called global edit. So basically work on one side and the other side automatically updates. And then the mountains is about combining features of Illustrator that are usually, for most users, are the most difficult to figure out. And in that one example, I can show you how to work with compound shapes, clipping masks, and the blend tool all in one. So these are like more complex techniques, but in a very simple example, but a very effective technique. So let me start the poll, and you guys can decide which one you want to see. So this will be on the screen now, and you can decide. So I'm just launching it now. So the fox, which is about working with shapes and drawing a character, the fox about the symmetry, and then the mountains with the more complex advanced techniques using compound shapes, clipping masks, and the blend tool. So let's see, I can see the results coming in. Okay, the fox is winning so far. Mountains second, and the wolf is the third. Okay, almost everyone voted. I'll just give a little bit more time, just a few more seconds. Let's see, fox is still winning. There's 20% left who didn't vote yet. It's exciting to see how the results change, but it seems like it's a solid winner is the fox. So almost everyone voted now. We spent 1 minute on this poll, so I think that should be enough. So I can see that the fox is the one that you guys would like to see. So I'm just going to close the poll now. Thank you so much for your input. So you should see my screen again and myself. So the fox technique is something that I just show you very quickly now, and then I return back to the monster example. So this is actually something that I would have shown anyway with the Dracula, but it's a little bit more interesting to see it on the fox. Although it is not a monster, it still applies. Its character art is the same thing. So I would, for example, if going back to the vampire, I would draw the collar with this. So just showing it quickly here and then switching to the fox. If I were to draw the collar, I would use the ellipse tool, but again, spacebar held down will always help you to move your shapes around while drawing them. So you can move them into place like so, and then you can draw all of those curves that you need very quickly. See how I'm aligning this to that other shape that I need. This probably needs to be even bigger. So I'm constantly moving it around with the shape, with the space bar, until I get the right shape, because it's always tricky to find out what shape you need. So that's why you need to learn to work with the space bar. See how I immediately got all of those curves, and then I could just select these shapes, switch to the shape builder, which is Shift M, and holding down Alt or Option key, you can get rid of anything that you don't need. So all these elements, and then anything that you want to merge, just simply draw over. But let me show you this properly with the fox. So the fox is made up, I think, entirely of circles, maybe apart from the legs. I think I've done those from rectangles, but everything else is based on circles or ellipses. So what I do most of the time is start drawing the circle. In this case, let's say this is going to be the head. So I hold down the Shift key. That's going to make sure it's a perfect circle. And then if I need to change the shape, I can use the pen tool and hold down the Alt key to click on a point to turn it into a sharp corner. So that's going to be obviously the nose in this case. Then we can use the Alt key to drag these points around, or just use the direct selection tool and then move that point up or down, depending where I want it to be. Maybe let's just have it somewhere there. Okay, so that is already going to be the head. I'm just going to select that color that we used. And then what I need here is to use the ellipse tool to draw these details for the eye areas. So if I draw one circle on the right side, holding down Shift key and spacebar, I can move it around, place it there. I'm sampling that color. And then I am going to use the O key, which is reflect tool, click on the center point of this other shape, and then click and drag and hold down the Alt and Shift keys together. Alt to duplicate, Shift key to keep it symmetrical on the other side. By the way, there is a recording which will be available later, so don't worry. If I'm going too fast, you will be able to go through these later from the recording. But yeah, so you can see that if I have it on the other side, now I can select these shapes and then switch to the shape builder tool and just simply alt click or option click on the details that I don't need anymore. So that makes it much easier to get rid of the details that we don't need. And then we can draw the nose. Let's just draw the nose in here. Select that color that I used on the other side. I can align it, make sure that it sits there. Select it all. Again, alt click, delete what I don't need. And keep going like that, drawing the eyes. I'm just going to speed up a bit, make sure that we have time for everything that I wanted to cover. Reflect tool, click on the top, alt shift click to the left side. And then here's another one, I'm not sure what I would call these, the whiskers or the things on the side of the head of the fox, that fur, extra fur there. If I draw another ellipse, sample this color, and then alt click and drag to duplicate that shape. Okay, and this is what I would normally do to create those details. Then I select these two shapes, and using the alt key or option key, I delete the rest and I only keep that little detail there. Now I can also use the eraser tool. Holding down the alt or option key with the eraser tool, I can delete a big chunk of that detail, and then I can just align it here. Now, because it's the same color, you don't have to worry about the overlap. You can keep it as a separate shape and then just duplicate it, make one maybe smaller than the other one, and then nicely align them like so. Maybe this can come a little bit closer. And then again, you can even group these if you want. Use the reflect tool, click on a center point, click and drag and hold down Alt and Shift to get that other side. And then if I need the ears are very simple as well. Once again, circle. Notice how I've done everything from a circle. So this is a circle again. Pen tool, click on the top. Oh, sorry, not Alt click or option click on the top. Creates a sharp point for the ear. And then we just sample that color like so. And by the way, I can use the reshape tool as well to add a little bit more interest on the ear. Something like that, so it's not so uniform as it was before. And then copy paste this, Alt Shift drag to make it smaller and keep it centered. And there we have the ear. Let's group that and move it behind. Command Shift square brackets you can use to arrange, or Control Shift square brackets, arrange things behind or in front. And I'm just going to make it slightly bigger. All right, and then let's reflect this onto the left side as well. Now, to combine a little bit the techniques, because I know that you might be interested, even though the poll said, I mean, everyone voted for the fox. I can combine that technique about the symmetry as well into this example, because we created a symmetrical shape here with the head. So how would you go around making changes at the same time on both sides? So obviously, if I select the ears, I can use the keys on the keyboard to move them up and down, and they move in symmetry. But if I wanted them to be rotating at the same time and keep the symmetry still active, that might be a little bit more tricky. Or, for example, if I wanted the eyes to move closer or further out, again, I wouldn't be able to do that easily. I would have to move one and then the other, and remember how much I move one, and it just gets confusing. So Here's this amazing new feature in Illustrator called Global Edit, which finally makes it possible to edit and work in symmetry in a very simple way. So let me show you this first with the ears, all right? So I select the ears, which is already a group, and the feature is here on the right side called Start Global Edit. The Properties panel is something new in Illustrator, and it's something I highly recommend to have open because it has a lot of useful things there. And Start Global Edit is one of them. So when you click on this, what Illustrator is doing is it's capable of finding all the matching paths, all the instances, which are exactly the same as the one that you currently selected, and it highlights them with a rectangle. So the blue rectangle is the instance or the other version of that what we are working with. But because that's reflected already, look what happens. If I move this to the left, that goes to the right. If I move this to the center, it comes to the center. And I can even overlap them. So there's no center of symmetry here. That's the most coolest thing. And I just recently discovered this or realized that this is my most favorite way of working with symmetry since a couple of days that I realized this. But what's even cooler is you can do rotations, and look at that. Like both sides are rotating at the same time in symmetry. It's just unbelievable. It just saves so much time and makes it so much easier to work. But of course, if you click away, it automatically gets out of the symmetry mode or the global edit mode. So now I can select one and make custom changes. So if I wanted to make the ears a bit different, like this one on the left side feels like it's listening a bit more, then you can do that. So you don't have to, you're not forced to work in symmetry. Only when needed, you can turn it on. I love this feature, and obviously this would apply to everything. So even these things here, if I just select one of them and I say Start Global Edit, it will actually select all 4 of them, because remember, we created that shape first and then duplicated, and then the whole thing will be reflected on the other side. So it means that by selecting any of them, I can control all of them at once. Now, why would that be useful? Just look at this. If I zoom a little bit closer and I decide that this corner here should be rounded, I can use the corner widget to round it off and immediately notice how all of the other ones got rounded down. So just crazy the amount of stuff you can do with Global Edit. Now, the Start Global Edit has also additional options, by the way. You can decide whether it will select instances on all the artboards in the document or just the current artboard, or filter it down to a specific set of artboards if you want. And you can also decide whether you want to match the appearance. So again, it just filters it further. So if you have a different colored version of the same object, it won't select it automatically if the appearance is different, and so on and so forth. So you can refine how it works, because obviously it can cause issues selecting things that you don't want. So that's when you need to refine and set it up the way you want to work with it. Cool. So that's pretty much all the techniques we had time for in this presentation. But just before we get to the questions and answers, and by the way, this is probably the best time to still ask your questions if you have any in the questions area, because I will be able to respond to them now. But what I just wanted to jump back to very quickly is to show you a few amazing examples from artists that I love and I admire, and I would highly recommend to follow them on Instagram or check out their work on their websites. I didn't include additional details, but if you search for that name that I have here, you will find them. They are probably the best in the industry, creating unique, quirky character art, specifically monster-related art. So I'm just showing a few here, and a few points or few things to keep in mind when you are drawing your characters. The first most important thing is always tell a story. No matter what you're doing without any text, if you can convey some kind of story with your character, then that's going to be a winning design. So remember our little illustration with the vampire. If you look at the final result, let me just show you the final result very quickly. So we have the final result there. Originally, I didn't have anything on the hand, and I think it was a really boring pose as well. I'm not sure if I have the original one here, but it was a really boring pose. And then I thought of that telling a story always helps, so that's why I decided to use the little bat and obviously the big nose going over the sleeves. So just giving personality is always an important element of character design. And then just very quickly, just a few more minutes before we get to the questions, a couple of other points to keep in mind. Shapes and lines. To work with shapes in general, or shape language it's also called, is crucial. While blocky rectangular shapes usually create very solid and strong and grounded characters, triangular shapes normally create more aggressive and like scary characters. And round shapes always create more cute and friendly characters. Like, I love this one. This dragon is just so funny. All made of circles. And remember our little fox. There's a reason I only use circles, again, to make it cute. Silhouettes is another big point that you need to pay attention to. Whenever you create a character, test it, how the silhouette looks. Does it read well? Can you tell what the character is doing? And you can see, like these guys here on the left side, obviously famous character designs. And there's a reason why they work so well, because even the silhouette helps you to recognize them. So they pay so much attention to these at these big studios like Disney. We have exaggeration is another cool thing to do. Remember the huge nose of the Dracula, or vampire, that's something that obviously I exaggerated. The long fingers was another exaggeration. You can see here again, like my favorite out of these is probably the zombie in the middle. And look at those limbs. Like, it's so like thin and long, and also it shows really well that it's approaching us because the foot is really close up. So there's a sense of what is it called, not perspective, there's a better word for it, foreshortening. But yeah, again, with the alligator character, it's not just making the shoulders and the biceps big, but it's also making the hand small. That helps to make it look really strong and muscular, right? So the hand small, the arms big, and shoulders big, and also the neck is massive, and the face is small. So it's the exaggeration and proportions that you're playing with that creates interesting characters. Expressions, very important. Like, you want to exaggerate the expressions again. Look at these guys here on the right side. It's just so funny, the expressions, and you really want to go all out on them. So usually what I do is I draw an expression first, and I take it to the next level, and then take it to the next level, and I keep exaggerating the exaggeration until I get to something crazy, but that's usually the one that works. With the nose as well, I started with half the size, and I made it bigger and bigger and bigger until it obviously gets too much, but that's how I normally would work. Posture and stance, again, you can tell the story by just simply using the posture. Like, I love this cactus that is afraid of the balloon. I think there is actually like an illness. It's called globophobia, when you're afraid of balloons. So yeah, again, just such a smart and witty story. I love that one, but all the other ones are brilliant. And then scale, again, to show scale is very important. So especially if you are drawing an imaginary character, a monster, no one would know how big this character is unless you show something next to them. Like here, the bike, we don't know whether it's a kid's or an adult's bike, but still we can relate to the size of a bike. And even if it's a kid's bike, this guy here is quite big, but not as big as that guy next to him, the Yeti type of character. We can see immediately just a few little indication of trees behind him, and immediately you can tell it's a huge character. So scale, very important. Show it something, show the scale with an object we can relate to, or a human character is always good. Colors, very important to find a good color theme. It can really make an impression and then set the mood for your character design. And then shading, you can do all kinds of different shading techniques, from very flat shading to more soft shading, or these more graffiti style shading. It's all techniques that you can learn to do, and it's up to you, your preference and the style that you prefer to convey or create. And of course, texture is a big thing. Using textures helps to make your vector illustration more engaging and more real, I would say. So it helps to make them look like traditional drawings or paintings or anything like charcoal. So it's always good to apply textures as well. All right, and that's all. So we have around 10 minutes left for the questions, and I am going to keep my screen visible while I go through these questions. And I am going to go through the questions in order they were asked. So there's the first question coming from Chloe. She asked whether I combine digital painting with Illustrator. Sometimes, yes. So just for those who are not familiar, what would be a digital painting? Digital painting is something like this here. If I just go back for a second to this one here, that portrait, I would call more like a digital painting. That's actually something I've also done started in Procreate and worked over it a bit in Photoshop. Normally, I would say I either use Illustrator and fully do something in vectors, or I do something that is not using any vectors at all, and it is becoming more like a digital painting. So I normally don't do a crossover between them, but it happened in the past. So there's a few cases when it actually makes sense to do so. Like with the cars example that I have here, that's almost entirely in Photoshop, because the characters were already pixel renders. So they were renders from a 3D application, and then it was already in Photoshop anyway. So to set up all these perspective lines and the grids and everything, it was easier to do in Photoshop, although some of those elements are actually vector smart objects. So they are coming from Illustrator. So there is very often a cross between the two applications. So yes, I hope that makes sense. It really depends on the project, and it's always good to make the most of each application and combine them together. By the way, before I forget, there is a discount for the screens that I'm working with, and there is the screen that I'm using at the moment is the PD3200U from BenQ. It's an amazing screen for designers, and without saying anything like that I'm just saying for the sake of it, the most important thing, and I intentionally had these glasses here to show it to you, because it's funny. So these glasses, luckily I have no issue with my eyesight. So there's no optics or anything on this. It's just filters out the blue light. Because when I'm working with most screens, to be honest, when I'm working with them, I find that after like 10 hours, sometimes I'm really bad, I work like 10 hours flat out, sitting at the computer. I always have water with me, like bottles of water lining up to make sure at least I drink, even if I don't do anything else. But because I'm staring at the screen for so long, by the end of the day, literally my eyes start to hurt, like it's really bad. I mean, like, this is something really you should pay attention to, because as a designer, your eyes are probably the most important tools or parts of your body, because without that you will be in trouble. So I'm trying to protect my eyes by using these glasses, so it filters out all the blue light. So unless I'm working with colors, this is perfect. But if I'm working with colors, it looks completely off, obviously. So for sketches and writing and stuff like that, this is perfectly fine. But the good thing is, since I started using the BenQ, I actually, this monitor that I mentioned, I actually feel the difference. So I don't get eye strain. So even if I work like 10, 12 hours, I'm fine and I don't need this. So I can feel a physical difference working with it because it has an eye care technology built into it, the whole series. And if you are interested in these products, we have a coupon that will be sent to you as well. It's a discount. It's called Webinar Martin, which you get, I think, 10% discount on these products. So worth checking out. I mean, the 3200U is the 4K Ultra HD screen. It's massive. It's a beautiful screen. It looks really nice on a desk. But that's, I think, is the top of the range. But you have several different options there. So going through the other questions. Okay, I think, yes, we have another question also from Chloe. Have your Illustrator characters ever been used in animation, like maybe in After Effects? Yes, and if I know that they will end up in After Effects, then I would build them specifically for that. So it's almost like a rigging that you have to do, make sure that all the objects are grouped that way and they are easy to animate. So yeah, I worked on animation projects, and it just means that you have to really pay attention to grouping and make sure that everything is easily editable and can be moved separately. So that's like Illustrator is perfect for that. You just have to build it accordingly. I always build it and try to organize things, but if I work for animation, I pay extra attention to that. Another question, have you tried, this question is coming from Julian. Have you tried the Adobe Illustrator Draw app on the iPad? Do you find it useful at all, or is it too limited? Yes, I tried it and I used it. I used it for just sketching and like coming up with ideas. It's great because it works in vectors and you can synchronize it and send it straight into Illustrator. That I love. But to be honest, I find it a little bit limiting. And I don't actually feel like on the iPad I want to work with vectors. It's just for some reason, vectors for me works better with the mouse. So I don't really need a stylus when I work in Illustrator. I use the mouse because I want to be more precise and fit everything the way I want it. And the mouse actually works better for that. While if I work in Photoshop, I would use a stylus and Wacom tablet or the Cintiq. I have one behind me. Yeah, so what I mean is that if I work on the iPad, I probably prefer to use Procreate, but there is something that I can't talk about yet that I know Adobe is working on. A new app is on the horizon, so that might be an interesting option. So keep an eye on the new apps that they will be releasing next year. There's definitely a big focus on drawing on mobile devices, and Procreate won all the awards this year. So it won the best iPad and best iPhone app as well. And there's a reason for that, because they are amazing. They are so innovative, and especially they created this new feature where you draw even like curves and just hold it a bit and then it turns into a perfect curve, but still keeping your natural pressures that you apply to the brush. If you haven't tried Procreate, highly recommend it. Another question also from Julian. Can you use the pen tool or something similar in Procreate? Unfortunately, they don't have a pen tool. They have a lasso. It doesn't really work like the pen tool. I would love them to have something similar to the pen tool. But as I said, this new feature is like the pen tool in a way. So I'm not sure what the term or the name for it, but it turns your lines into more like constructed, very smooth lines, which is really interesting. Another question also from Julian. You mentioned you use the iPad for your ideas, then transfer to Illustrator on desktop, I assume. What do you use on the desktop? An external tablet or like a Cintiq? Yeah, so I just mentioned I have an Intuos and I also have a Cintiq. Normally, I like to have the Cintiq completely separate, and I normally hook it up with my MacBook Pro, my laptop, and I use another computer with multiple screens. So I just find the Cintiq so big, especially the big one that I have, that it takes over the desk. So if I have it on the desk, I can't do anything else. So I like to keep it separate. And if I need to do more drawing, I will go there. And I'm actually using a standing desk for that. And you can see slightly in the background, that's a reference screen next to it, but there's the Cintiq. If I just turn it a bit, you will probably see it. I don't want to mess up the camera though, so it's not in the frame. Let me go to, there's 2 more questions and then we are finished. Okay, that's nothing. Yeah, and it was just Jill asking, are we sharing the recording? I think we are. I'm not 100% sure about that. But this is something that most likely will be answered in the follow-up email. You will all attendees will get an email, and then you should be able to get the all the information you need. So I hope, yes. So I can just see it was confirmed that the recording will be available later. So I had to run through quite a lot of things. I tried to compress as much as I could. So remember those points that I mentioned. If I was too fast, just go back and watch it again about how to create engaging characters. I think those artists are just the best examples to follow and learn from and get inspiration from. And those points that I mentioned, if you remember, and the tools that I showed you, Shape Builder, Curvature Tool, Pen Tool, are basically your most important tools to draw. And everything just relies on how much you do it. So the more you do it, the better you get, just like with sketching. So I am, yeah, there's one last question came in from Anka. How hard it was at the beginning of your career? Very. It's obviously, everything is hard in the beginning, no matter what you're doing, whether it's the career itself or a specific skill. The easiest to explain is I play around 3 or 4 instruments, and each time when I started learning a new instrument, I had to go through the same basic stuff. Even though I played the piano for like 12 years, when I picked up the clarinet for the first time, I was a complete beginner and it was horrible. Like I hated how it sounded. I could play back then I could already play like ragtime and Chopin and stuff on the piano. And then I had to start with the basic little lullabies and stuff like that for the clarinet. So, but as long as you put the hours in and as long as you are motivated enough to continue and practice, eventually you get good. So it's the same thing with everything. I think it's all about your efforts that you put into something and be dedicated. So if you decide that you want to be good at Illustrator or you want to be good at drawing, it's just sticking to it. You have to continue to do it and set yourself challenges, like a 30-day challenge to do something. We set ourselves the 365 days of creativity challenge, which made sure that we produced, me and my team, a full project for every day. It was a huge task, but we managed to do it. And through that, we learned a lot as well. Like we had to come up with new techniques each time. So yeah, I mean, that's the best way to put it. Just everything is difficult in the beginning and it gets easier the longer you do it. Cool. So that's all I think for today. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we can do this more often in the future. So let us know what you thought. You can email the organizers, and thank you so much for BenQ for organizing it. And yeah, good luck with everything, guys, and enjoy using Illustrator or whatever tool you are using, and have fun creating characters. Cheers and bye.